The chaos butterfly. John Parker was a man of routine. Every morning at precisely 6:30, he would rise from bed, brew a cup of strong black coffee, and sit at his desk to work on his research. A professor of mathematics at a prestigious university, John was deeply fascinated by chaos theory, particularly the concept of the butterfly effect. The idea that a small change in initial conditions could lead to vastly different outcomes intrigued him to no end. It was a chilly autumn morning when John first noticed something unusual. He was meticulously typing up his latest paper on the nonlinear dynamics of weather systems when his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, and it simply read, "The wings of the butterfly have started to flap." John dismissed it as a prank, probably from one of his students, and continued his work. However, throughout the day, he couldn't shake off a growing sense of unease. His concentration faltered, and he found himself glancing at the message repeatedly. By evening, his apprehension had only intensified. That night, John dreamed of butterflies. He was standing in a dense forest, surrounded by millions of them, their delicate wings fluttering in synchrony. The air was thick with the sound of their flapping, which grew louder and more intense until it became a deafening roar. John woke up in a cold sweat, the sound of wings echoing in his ears. The following morning, he received another text. "The chaos has begun." This time, John couldn't dismiss it so easily. He decided to investigate. He started by tracking the number, but it was untraceable, likely a burner phone. He then began to pay closer attention to his surroundings, looking for any signs of unusual occurrences. As days turned into weeks, John's life began to unravel. Minor inconveniences morphed into significant disruptions. His car broke down inexplicably, forcing him to rely on public transportation. His computer crashed repeatedly, erasing crucial research data. Students started to complain about his erratic behavior and missed classes. John was slipping into a state of paranoia, convinced that the messages and the events were interconnected. One evening, while poring over his research notes, John stumbled upon a reference to a reclusive scientist named Eleanor Whitley, who had supposedly made groundbreaking discoveries in chaos theory before vanishing without a trace. Intrigued, John decided to dig deeper. He spent hours in the university library, searching through old journals and obscure publications. Finally, he found a mention of Dr. Whitley in a 30-year-old paper on meteorological anomalies. According to the paper, Whitley had theorized that certain patterns in weather systems could be influenced by seemingly insignificant events. She believed that the flapping of a butterfly's wings could indeed trigger a chain reaction leading to catastrophic consequences. Her radical ideas were dismissed by the scientific community, and she retreated into obscurity. Determined to find her, John traced her last known address to a remote cabin in the mountains. With a mixture of excitement and trepidation, he set out on a weekend to find her, hoping she could shed light on the mysterious messages and the chaos enveloping his life. The journey to the cabin was arduous. The narrow, winding road was barely navigable, and the weather grew increasingly hostile. By the time John reached the cabin, a storm was raging. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding. After what seemed like an eternity, the door creaked open, and an elderly woman with piercing blue eyes stood before him. "Dr. Whitley?" John asked tentatively. The woman nodded. "And you must be John Parker. I've been expecting you." John was taken aback. "How did you know I was coming?" Dr. Whitley smiled enigmatically. "The butterflies told me." She ushered him inside, and they sat by the fireplace, the warmth a stark contrast to the howling wind outside. John explained his predicament, showing her the messages and recounting the strange occurrences. Dr. Whitley listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. When John finished, she sighed. "What you're experiencing, Mr. Parker, is the butterfly effect in its purest form. Someone or something has set off a chain reaction, and you are caught in the middle of it." "But why me?" John asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Because you are a catalyst," Dr. Whitley replied. "Your research, your work on chaos theory, has made you a target. The universe is trying to communicate with you, to warn you of the consequences of meddling with forces beyond your control." John felt a chill run down his spine. "What can I do to stop it?" Dr. Whitley gazed into the fire, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. The only way to break the chain is to find the source of the disturbance and correct it. But be warned, the journey will be perilous, and the cost may be greater than you can imagine. Despite the ominous warning, John was determined to set things right. Dr. Whitley gave him a cryptic map, marked with a series of coordinates and strange symbols. Follow the path, she instructed. It will lead you to the heart of the chaos. The next morning, John set out on his quest. The coordinates led him deeper into the mountains, through treacherous terrain and unrelenting weather. As he progressed, he noticed that the natural world around him seemed to be in disarray. Trees were twisted into grotesque shapes, animals acted erratically, and the very air felt charged with malevolent energy. After days of grueling travel, John reached a secluded valley, hidden from the world. At its center stood an ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The ground beneath it was littered with butterfly wings, a kaleidoscope of colors shimmering in the dim light. John approached the tree, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. As he reached out to touch the trunk, he was enveloped in a blinding light. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a surreal landscape, a nightmarish reflection of the real world. The sky was a swirling vortex of storm clouds, and the ground pulsed with a sinister energy. In the distance, John saw a figure standing atop a jagged hill. As he drew closer, he recognized the figure as himself, a doppelganger with eyes filled with malevolence. "Who are you?" John demanded, his voice trembling. The doppelganger smirked. "I am you, and I am not you. I am the manifestation of your fears, your doubts, your chaos. You sought to understand the butterfly effect, and now you are living it." John realized that the only way to restore balance was to confront this dark version of himself. With a surge of determination, he charged at the doppelganger, the two of them colliding in a fierce struggle. The world around them seemed to ripple and warp with their every move. As they fought, John began to understand that he needed to accept his own flaws and fears rather than trying to eradicate them. With this realization, he stopped fighting and embraced his doppelganger, merging into a single entity. The storm clouds dissipated, and the surreal landscape faded away. John found himself back in the valley, the ancient oak tree standing silently before him. The butterfly wings had vanished, and the air felt calm and serene. Exhausted but relieved, John made his way back to Dr. Whitley's cabin. She greeted him with a knowing smile. "You have faced your chaos and emerged victorious." John nodded. "But I still don't understand who sent the messages or why." Dr. Whitley placed a hand on his shoulder. "Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, Mr. Parker. Sometimes, the journey is more important than the destination." John returned home, forever changed by his experience. He continued his research, but with a newfound respect for the delicate balance of the universe. He never received another mysterious message, and his life gradually returned to normal. Years later, as he looked back on those tumultuous days, John realized that the butterfly effect was not just a scientific concept but a profound lesson in the interconnectedness of all things. The flap of a butterfly's wings could indeed set off a chain reaction, but it was up to each individual to navigate the chaos and find their own path to harmony. And somewhere, in a hidden valley, the butterflies continued to flap their wings, a reminder of the fragile beauty and infinite complexity of the world we live in. Months after the ordeal, as John settled back into his routine, he couldn't shake off a lingering sense of unease. The calmness that had followed his return felt temporary, like the eye of a storm. His dreams were still haunted by the sound of flapping wings, growing louder with each passing night. One particularly restless night, John was jolted awake by a loud crash. His heart racing, he crept downstairs to find his front door ajar, swaying gently in the wind. The sight was unnerving. He was certain he had locked it before going to bed. With a flashlight in hand, John cautiously stepped outside. The air was eerily still, the silence broken only by the distant rustling of leaves. As he scanned his surroundings, his flashlight beam caught a glimmer of something on the ground. He bent down to pick it up, his breath catching in his throat as he realized what it was. A butterfly wing, identical to the ones he had seen in the valley. John's mind raced. Had he truly ended the chaos, or was this just the beginning of something far more sinister? Determined to find answers, he decided to visit Dr. Whitley once more. The drive to the mountains was shrouded in a thick fog, and by the time John arrived at the cabin, the sun was beginning to rise. He knocked on the door, but there was no response. The cabin looked abandoned, the windows dark and lifeless. Pushing the door open, John stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. The fireplace was cold, and a thick layer of dust covered the furniture. It was as if Dr. Whitley had never been there. Confused and alarmed, John searched the cabin for any clues but found nothing. Just as he was about to leave, he noticed a faint glow emanating from beneath a trapdoor in the floor. He pried it open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. With his flashlight flickering, John descended the steps, his heart pounding in his chest. The staircase led to a hidden laboratory, filled with strange equipment and arcane symbols. In the center of the room stood a large glass tank, inside which floated hundreds of butterflies, their wings gently fluttering. As John approached, he noticed a journal lying open on a nearby table. The journal contained detailed notes on chaos theory, but what caught John's attention was the final entry. The experiment has succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. The butterflies are not merely agents of chaos, they are conduits to a parallel dimension where reality is mutable. John Parker's arrival was predicted, his role crucial. The chaos is not over, it has only just begun. The next phase is inevitable. John's blood ran cold. Dr. Whitley had used him as a pawn in her experiment, manipulating events to trigger a chain reaction that would bridge two realities. The messages, the disturbances, and the doppelganger were all part of her plan. Suddenly, the butterflies in the tank began to agitate, their wings beating furiously. The air in the lab grew thick with a palpable energy, and the ground beneath John's feet started to tremble. The walls seemed to warp and bend, and a sense of impending doom filled the room. Realizing he had to act fast, John searched the lab for anything that could stop the impending disaster. He found a control panel with a series of levers and buttons, each labeled with cryptic symbols. Desperation and adrenaline fueled his actions as he frantically tried to decipher the controls. With a deep breath, John pulled a lever marked with the symbol of a butterfly. The tank shattered, and the butterflies swarmed out, filling the room with a blinding light. John felt himself being lifted off his feet, his body disintegrating into a million particles of light. When he regained consciousness, John found himself back in his home, lying on the floor of his study. The morning sun streamed through the window, and everything seemed normal. But as he got to his feet, he noticed a single butterfly wing on his desk, glowing faintly before disintegrating into dust. John knew that his encounter with the butterfly effect had altered his reality in ways he could never fully understand. The boundaries between dimensions had been blurred, and the chaos theory had become an intrinsic part of his existence. He could only hope that the actions he had taken had been enough to prevent further catastrophe. In the months that followed, John dedicated himself to understanding the true nature of chaos and the delicate interplay between order and disorder. He published a groundbreaking paper that redefined chaos theory, earning him acclaim and respect in the scientific community. Yet, he remained vigilant, aware that the butterfly effect was ever present, waiting to be triggered once more. And so, John Parker lived with the knowledge that the universe was a fragile tapestry, each thread interconnected and capable of unraveling at the slightest touch. He had glimpsed the depths of chaos and emerged with a profound respect for the unknown forces that governed reality. The butterfly effect had taught him that even the smallest actions could have far-reaching consequences, a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his days. As the years passed, John became a mentor to young scientists, sharing his experiences and imparting the wisdom he had gained. He never spoke of the true extent of his ordeal, knowing that some things were best left unsaid. But he always kept a watchful eye on the world around him, ready to intervene should the wings of the butterfly begin to flap once more. For in the end, the butterfly effect was not just a theory but a reminder of the intricate and unpredictable nature of life itself. And John Parker, guardian of the fragile balance, stood ready to face whatever chaos the future might bring.